Okay, so today we're going to talk about movement, rhythm, and non-focal point design. So first let's talk about movement. For a design to be successful, your eye should move around it with ease and not get stuck anywhere. So your eye moves around a design following areas of diminishing contrast. So this concept is a little difficult to understand, so let's just kind of unpack it. Diminishing contrast, focal areas within a design that diminish in importance, move the viewer's eye around the picture plane, and create a line of visual movement or directional line. So what does that mean? Basically, there are multiple focal areas in an image. Some are very important, some are sort of important, and some are not very important at all. But your eye will move from the most important to the least important, and that creates a directional line, okay? So directional line is created by diminishing areas of contrast, or focal areas. Also, perspective lines can also move the viewer's eye around the picture plane, and we're going to see that in some of the images we're going to look at. So let's just kind of look at some images and see if we can kind of unpack this. Where is the directional line in these images? Okay, so what's the most important area in this image? Well, it would be her face, right? That's where our eye goes. It's basically in the center of the image, kind of at the top, okay? Now the second and third most important, so let's see. Your eye tends to move to her hand and to the handbag, okay, which is at her other hand. So you're kind of moving from her eye to her hands. You're also following the line of her body, okay? And that's more of a line of perspective. So this line here moves you across the image, okay? So really the most important things in this image are her face, what's in her hand, okay? And there's a lot of other stuff going on. There's a bunch of junk over here, a bunch of bags over here, and they're not really important. But your eye does look at them, but not as much as you look here, here, and here. And that creates a directional line, okay? In this image, we have this strong black, it looks like the underside of a bridge. This is really visually strong, and it kind of frames this person. So your eye kind of moves down it to look at him, and then across this line here. Now obviously, you're drawn to the face, okay? But you're also drawn to the body, okay? So this would be the first thing you look at, and this would be the second. And you kind of move from his face, you see, across. That creates a directional line. All right, let's take a look at this ad here. A lot going on, all right? Your eye kind of moves all over the place. But this line here, from her hand down to these two models' faces, this creates a directional line, and then you kind of move around. You kind of move over here, you move down here, okay? That's the directional line, is where your eye is moving across the image. This one, kind of a simple image, repetition of models. You just kind of move across. You follow their eyes across, and that creates the directional line. So let's talk about rhythm. This is a little easier to understand. Rhythm is also known as a visual beat, and it's often created and designed by a motif. A motif is an element that repeats throughout a design, such as a line, a shape, or a texture. The use of a motif is often how designers create unity throughout a collection. Okay, so let's look at this image. What would be the motif? What is the element that's repeated? Well, it's the hat, okay? So all these outfits are very different. You know, the color scheme is similar and things like that. But the hat is the motif that the designer has repeated to add a sense of unity to this collection. That is an example of a motif. Here, what's the motif? So you see these little splotches on her coat are actually kind of similar visually to the text. So they've used this white little splotch and the text as a way to add unity to the image. That's a motif. Here, the motif would be the lines in the plants, okay? So it's not the same exact thing repeated, it's something that's similar that's getting repeated. Here, the motif would be the lines, okay? So there's lines in the dress and lines of the grasses. That's the motif, okay? So they're similar but not the same. Here, the motif is the repetition of the model. Now you see, it's not exactly the same. She's got a different face every time. She's making different hand gestures, but you're reading it as the same thing repeated over and over again. That is a motif. Line quality. Let's talk about line quality. Different lines can create different moods. So a horizontal line is very passive and restful. A vertical line is upright, it's attentive. Diagonal creates motion and can convey speed. Flowing lines are lyrical and soothing. A zigzag is agitated, it's excited. Spiral, playful, excited. A broken line is erratic and kind of nervous. An arcing line can be melancholy and kind of languid. And a scribble is anxious and frenetic. And we'll see some examples of that in a second. Horizontal lines, right? Very passive, very restful, because it reminds us of a horizon line. Vertical, upright, attentive. Diagonal conveys motion and speed. And remember, we talked about diagonal lines, how your eye tends to follow them, okay? So that creates the feeling of motion. Flowing lines are very lyrical and soothing. So what are the different lines in this image and what are they conveying to the viewer? So let's just go through it. So there's kind of this sense of a kind of low horizon, like horizontal line here in the couch, which is very restful, kind of soothing. We've got this statue here, this upright statue that's vertical and attentive. This arc here is kind of playful, but also kind of relaxing and soothing. These lines here of the plants, all the lines of the plants, they're kind of all over the place, and they kind of add an energy to the space that is otherwise kind of calming and soothing, okay? So this designer is using lines, okay, to give your eye kind of, to keep it interesting and keep you moving around the space, okay? So we've got the kind of low horizon line of the chairs and sofa, this upright statue here, all the kind of frenetic lines of the plants that are adding energy, and this kind of restful arc that's kind of playful but also kind of soothing, okay? And there's more, obviously. You can keep going, but these are just some areas in the image that I wanted to highlight. This ad, okay, this model, she's standing upright, she's attentive, she's kind of in your face, all right? So it's giving a very like, I don't want to say aggressive, but very like strong, you get a sense that this is not someone to be messed with, okay? And the designer is using that upright, very attentive posture to give that feeling. Here, we've got a lot of upright lines, okay? And then some classic kind of horizon lines. It's a very stable kind of image, okay? Sorry, there's a plane overhead. I'm outside because it's so nice. So they're using these upright models, okay? And then the kind of vertical lines. There's a sense of stability here. And it's very like, you can see how it's kind of framed. Everything's kind of framed, all right? Very classic, stable. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is non-focal point design. So, pattern. Pattern is a design or design elements that display a consistent and predictable repetition of elements. Pattern, by definition, does not have a focal point. So people usually engage with design through a focal point, but pattern is an equally successful way to structure your design work and a great way to gain attention. We look at things that are repeated. We can't help it. So, ways to create a non-focal point design. Repetition, motif, tessellation, which is a type of non-focal point design based on a repeating unit that interlocks into a complex mosaic. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. And ambiguity. Ambiguity is a type of non-focal point design based on clutter or eclecticism with no clear motif or pattern. Repetition. So, this is a pattern. This is actually one of my patterns. And this is just a drawing of a hosta plant that's repeated over and over again, okay, in a predictable manner. It's the same thing repeated over and over again. Motif, okay? So here's a circle, lots of different circles. Okay, they're not exactly the same, but they're repeated over and over again, okay? That's a motif. Tessellations. Now, tessellations are patterns that lock together. So let's look at this pattern here. If you look at the white rider, okay, there's a man on a horse. Then you look at the dark space, you'll see it's also a man on the horse. It's the same image, but it's locked together. Here, same thing, okay? And then let's look at these arrows. Arrow, 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 arrow. It locks together, okay? There's no positive or negative space. That's a tessellation. Ambiguity. Okay, so ambiguity is, there's no kind of clear focal point. It's just like a bunch of stuff, all right? Now, these are examples of glitch art, which is when artists kind of make art out of mistakes in technology. And they often rely on ambiguity. So positive and negative space becomes very important when working with non-focal point design. So there's clear-cut positive and negative space, positive and negative reversal, and inner space. And I'll show you examples of all of those. Clear-cut positive and negative. Okay, so we looked at these patterns. What's the positive space? Well, here, the positive are the circles. And the negative would be this blue background. It's clear, it's easy to read. Here is the same thing. The positive are the hostas, and the negative is this light blue background. Easy, easy peasy. It's clear cut. Positive and negative reversal would be like the tessellations, okay? Depending on what you're looking at, so if you look at the white rider, it looks like the dark is the negative space. But if you look at the dark rider, it looks like the white is the negative space, okay? So it reverses depending on what you're looking at. Inner space, okay? No positive, no negative, just a kind of big, almost like a void, but there's lots of stuff in it. So the repeat. I want to talk to you about the concept of a repeat. When working with patterns, you often hear this term repeat used. The repeat is the image that gets repeated, okay? So here, you see I've put a square around this bit in the pattern, and that's what gets repeated over and over again. And when we work with fabric, the repeat is often spoken of in terms of inches. And this allows you to figure out how much of a fabric you need. So if a pattern repeats every 6 inches, the repeat is 6 inches, okay? And this is just something I wanted to throw in. I want you guys to be aware of this term, especially as you start working with fabric. So pattern is really a very successful way to get people's attention. And here's an example of what's called wild posting. Wild posting is when people just put up a bunch of ads on the street. You've probably seen this like downtown, or if you go to a big city, you see people just do the same image over and over and over again. And you can't help but look at it because our eye is drawn to repetition. So wild posting takes advantage of this attraction to pattern, and this is a really cheap but effective way to advertise. Also, pattern on pattern. Very strong design choice. It's busy and it's crazy, but we can't help but be drawn to it, okay?